Hello and welcome to the West Yorkshire Football Show, looking at all things non-league. And joining us, as always, is our avid non-league supporter in Bradford Park Avenue fan, Lewis. Say hello, how are you, mate?
Hi, Chris. Not bad yourself?
Yes, not too bad. Now, I'll be honest, I think you're putting a brave face on it on the face of it there. Obviously, it was the disappointment that couldn't be fended off, really, on the final day. But I think if you kind of got to look at how we kind of talked over the last few weeks, there was a lot of times where we didn't necessarily think it would get to the final day.
Yeah, it was probably almost a mini achievement. We did take it to the final day. But, Fylde were a better team. We knew that were probably going to be the case. Before the game, you almost think it's going to be a 50-50 game. And it is, but it kind of also wasn't, because we know the budget, the players, also what they were going for as well in terms of being champions on the day, and they performed up to standard. They were clinical, they were ruthless, without probably being spectacular, but they did exactly what kind of champion teams do, and we just couldn't match them. We did okay, but I don't think the result was in any doubt really, and it was unfortunate that kind of put the eye against the Avenue's name at the end of a table at the end of the season as well. And, we were probably more looking at other fixtures and results happening around the league and seeing what else was happening in the playoffs. And, were Farsley going to go down? Were Kettering going to go down? And, because I think we knew pretty much once the first goal went in, that's going to be an absolute mountain to climb. We talk about a mountain climb. It's like Everest, I think, to climb that mountain when you go 1-0 down against Fylde. And, to be expected, unfortunately. There was been a bit in inevitability about it. But like you say, to take it to the final game, if you said that 2-3 months ago, we'd have absolutely taken that one.
Yeah, given the 3-0 win against Everton the game before, and have to mention, actually, we won't have spoken to you since, that free kick from Sam Fielding that was rather spectacular, it has to be said.
Yeah, it was one of those where I think everything just came together on the night. We've played Alfreton at home before, and probably the way they set up, the way they play football, probably isn't best suited to an artificial pitch, shall we say?
Yeah,
and I think it was just one of those where everything just seemed to work. We played well. There's taking nothing away from us, but Alfreton were poor, but everything seemed to just fall in our way. And Willis, who's been a decent keeper for Alfreton, had a shocker, if I'm being honest, in that first half. I think we were lucky to be free down, really. It could have been a lot more. And that gave you a bit of confidence going into that final game, thinking, it almost does need a miracle, but, what can happen in football? Anything can happen in it. And it was probably one step too far. I think obviously the result with Blythe wouldn't have, changed things even if we'd have won. But after that game at Alfreton, you were kind of thinking, well, it's a shame we are playing on Alexa Fylde. There's other teams in our division you could have probably preferred to play at home on that final day of the season. And especially with Fylde having something to play for as well, probably made it even worse for us as well.
I was going to say, you'd have basically taken any other team in the league, really, from Fylde or Kings Lynn, really.
Yeah.
Yes, there was other sides that had, playoffs to challenge for, but fundamentally, a side that's going for the title is always going to be a massive mountain to climb. Where does it kind of leave you? Because obviously, and I'll let you allude on this, there was a brief statement that's come out, a couple of days or so afterwards from Gareth Roberts, the kind of club's owner, effectively.
Yeah.
We're obviously thinking back as well to when we had Martin Knight on the show, a few weeks ago. Kind of, where do you kind of see things? How do you assess things at this stage? Because obviously, with what was said from Martin about this whole sustainability thing and, trying to break even, and we said off air a few times that to break even in non-league football, you need to be playing your trade right towards the bottom of it. It must be difficult to kind of see any chinks of light at the moment.
I think it's it's still obviously a little bit raw relegation. I think in some respects, like I said earlier, it was feeling it was going to be inevitable at some point. If I'm being honest, I think it's been on the cards for the past 3-4 years. So at some point, it was going to happen. It was a matter of probably when rather than if. I think from where we are at the moment, having previously been involved, avenue in years gone by, you guys know, pre-season is actually probably the busiest time of the year if you're involved in a football club. You talk about being involved week to week in games. Actually, that's quite a break compared to what you should be doing pre-season. The hard work for pre-season starts almost a few months before the end of the season. You've got to plan and you've got to prepare, and that's off the field, on the field, whatever that looks like. In terms of where we are now, I think the message is still similar to what's been said. I think from what was said in the local press last year, there was, kind of pushed to be the Champions League of the community, not necessarily on the pitch. This year, we're hearing something similar along the lines of, the priorities to be is to survive and be financially viable as possible. I think those words are being used. And then the next priority is the first team. So there's a little bit of similarities, and I think people are feeling possibly a little bit more encouraged at the first teams getting a bit of a recognition into that. But there's still a lot more stuff to do, I think, off a pitch. I think there's been appreciation, a bit of a statement. If I'm being honest, I think our interview a couple of month or two ago has probably helped some of the comms that's come out of the club, which was needed. There's still a whole load more that needs to be done, especially engaging with those of us that go home and away, those supporters of the club, because there is a disconnect with the club. I do sound like a broken record, but it is the case, and the club needs to solve that pretty quick. I know they've said the priority is to survive. In that respect, is that, are we on the edge of not surviving? If you read between the lines, are we in such a position where we're not going to survive? And like I said earlier, it's about thriving, not necessarily surviving. Your survival should be the absolute core of the club, of what you need to do, and then you build on that. So again, that'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. We've seen also another relegated team, Kettering, their kind of person, their owner, chairman has left, based on some kind of reaction from fans, and is handing it over to somebody else. He's left with immediate effect, and but they're completely different for me, different situations. Kettering, have really struggled over a lot of years, and Rich has done a great job at Kettering, and I think we seem to be in a different space. I think probably to that, the clubs are in different positions, probably both on and off a field, and I think from a fan's perspective and from a supporter's perspective as well, it's really time to speak with a lot of people, get people involved. Let's not just hear stuff that the fans necessarily want to hear. Let's, to be fair, there's been a bit of honesty, and I think that interview of the week was fairly honest as well. But, we need to, that stadium down at Horsfall needs to be full of people during that pre-season now, and engaging with folk, getting them on side, kind of understanding what's on people's minds, within reason, what can be done, what can't be done. And that all comes down to, again, comms and engagement with a lot of the stuff. And I think, there's an understanding that we're not going to at all probably walk that league in the MPL next season. I don't think there's a question of that. It's what does that next season look like? What's that, obviously might not be able to share confidential stuff, but what does the budget, is it competitive enough to mount a challenge into the playoffs? Is it competitive enough to be mid-table? Is it only competitive enough to potentially survive relegation? Is it competitive at all? And I think there's a load of questions that need to be answered, and probably still quite early stages about that. But I think from a support's perspective, and also speaking to some of the guys after the game at Fylde, it's making sure there's a core group of players that are willing to be there next year. Because for me, I think, being brutally honest, there's probably about 5 or 6 players that you would absolutely take into that team next year and build your team around that. But from the understanding, from what comments around it, it seems to be that there's going to be some experience with a lot of with quite a few full-time younger players, which I know was mentioned at a fans forum as well. So, which is all well and good, but the argument still stands that we've been to enough games in that level to know that you need a lot of experience. And some of them young lads are going to need almost a shoulder to lean on, because it's different playing on a 3G artificial pitch when it's sun shining and you've got the world at your feet at that level, But then again, it's different to potentially go into, Warrington Rylands on a cold Tuesday night in December. No disrespect to Rylands, but I think this is where, the players are going to have to be really stand up, be counted, and recruitment's got to be right.
It's slightly stark for me because obviously kind of working with Rochdale on their kind of media side there, and obviously the club. There's this similar feeling of a massive disengagement between the supporters and the club. There's a lot of talk of the squad from the interim managers of kind of trying to appeal for younger players next season, and I'm hoping that there's going to be that understanding that you also need experience, even in the National League. It is slightly stark, and the similarities in what you've been saying in that last speech to kind of the way things are.
Yeah.
Keeping it up, we work with Rochdale, mad, but I mean, ultimately, it's non-league football. It's a difficult place to go or to be involved in, whatever the level. And as you say, for the Northern Prem, you kind of look at it and think, excellent, South Shields have got them and all their money. And then up comes Macclesfield Town, up comes Worksop.
Yeah.
Who themselves have plowed a lot of money into getting into the NPL.
Yeah.
I was about to say before I remembered, oh yeah, Macclesfield, that on the face of it, the kind of disparity between probably the biggest spenders wage-wise and the lowest wouldn't be too bad, aside from Macclesfield. So they're instantly going to go as the favourites for next season.
We're going to be up there, aren't they, for sure. And I know obviously Warrington got promoted. You'd have put Warrington up there previously as well to get promoted. And obviously they've got that. And, I think, again, it shows that necessarily budget doesn't necessarily represent quality. You look at Bamber Bridge, I think arguably, a lot of fans they've come out and said they were probably one of the lowest, if not the lowest budget, and have got in the final of the playoffs. So
he's done an amazing job there.
Unbelievable job. And I think that shows what can be done with experience, connections. And I think this is where, from my perspective, is when you look at the likes of Browne and Bosch, and I know, we've got the critics like anybody has done, but we don't need top 6. We don't even probably need a top 8 budget for me to compete well in that NPL. If they were given almost a top 12 budget, potentially even top 14 kind of budget, they'd be more than capable of getting Avenue in the playoffs. Could they do it? Yeah. Could they not do it? Yeah. But I think because the connections have got, the players will play for him. Speaking to some of the players before, they enjoy playing for him. They actually enjoy playing for the club, even despite the relegation. There seems to be quite a connection between some of the management and the players, and I think that goes a long way. And I think outside looking in, you look at a team get relegated, it could be an easy decision to get rid of the management. And albeit we've not done brilliant over the past 3 or 4 years, but then we know that when the management do leave, there was, the whole team got rebuilt, and it was, we were playing players who were just at the time weren't ready for that level at Conference North. So for me, I think the biggest thing is to give them a budget that they're happy to work with. Don't get me wrong, I think there's probably going to have to be a bit of a compromise, but at the end of the day, if you've got the likes of Browne and Bosch staying, and I've seen recently as well an interview in a local media with, George Knight's Ken Worthy, he's still under contract, Will Longbottom's under contract. People are going to have to potentially come and pay for these players if they think they're good enough to stay in the Conference North. But yeah, for me, I think you're looking, and I'll be honest, I think, I'll talk about names. I think if you keep the likes of Sykes Ken Worthy, I think if you keep Lucas Dunstan, I think if you keep Luke Havern with Simon Richmond, and I think Harrison Hopper as well, and potentially Mitch London there, I think you'd be, and obviously Will Longbottom's there as well, I think you'd be quite happy going into that season and build around it. Marsla Bastide from the academy's come in and he's just excelled. He's done very well. Very raw, but he's got ability with the ball at his feet. And I can imagine he'll come back in pre-season, probably a bit of a stronger, person. May go on the weights a little bit, but without losing that technical ability. So, yeah, there's going to be competition up there. Maxwell are going to be up there. Like you mentioned, Gainsborough, Hyde, Radcliffe have stayed in this division, which I'm really surprised they didn't make the playoffs, but they had a horrific end to that season. Guiseley, again, will be up there. Ashton, you're normally knocking on the door as well. So, yeah, Macclesfield stand out. Worksop have come up. Workington have got a bit of momentum as well. But, you look at, if you keep a core players, like I said recently, you can push for that playoffs. It's everything around And again, strength in depth. We all know strength in depth's been an issue for Avenue over the past 3-4 years, and it's probably been thinner this season than it ever has been. And with that, you're not going to get the same quality loan players that you are going to get in the National League North compared to the NPL. So that's going to be it's going to be a tricky one for Mark and Danny to have. So I think almost if you give them a little bit of an extra budget to work with permanent players and get them players in, you might kind of counteract that quality of loan players coming in. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. But for me, recruitment wasn't right this season. It's got to be absolutely spot on. And for me, it should have started already, and I believe it already has.
Yeah, you kind of linked nicely actually to just what my next thought/question was going to be, because I'm sure I'd seen somewhere on social media a reply from Martin to another fan regarding the recruitment aspect. And again, this seems to be quite a common thing. Again, I can link this, I think, towards Rochdale to an extent as well, of the days of the manager knowing who he wants, going out and signing them, seem to be heading behind us, because I'm sure in this reply that's in from Martin, it was along the lines of finding X amount of players that fit numerous criteria and then whittling it down to whatever is statistically with your XGs and all your passing statistics and all that sort of thing, and then recruiting that way rather than necessarily the old style way of relying on a manager. And you think, especially with Bowles when he first took over at Avenue, of going for the players that he knows and trusts.
Yeah.
It's slightly scary, to be honest, that all this statistical side of the game is dropping to the 7th tier of English football as well, just as it is obviously at the top of the game.
Yeah, and this has been a massive thing, I think, again, for Avenue for quite a while, where scouting has kind of been hit and miss. And it needs to be that infrastructure to help Mark and Danny do the job, because ultimately, they're not full-time or part-time. Yes, they have connections on football, but they have businesses outside. Full-time, that is their brief, is to make sure that, the club is set up both, probably on the pitch more than anything, but has got the infrastructure around it. So I believe there's a little bit of extra support going into next year, which is good. It will be interesting to see that kind of recruitment style. Obviously we heard from Martin recently about, that kind of job title being director of football operations against commercials. So, is Martin getting involved even more so in that director of football and operations to help with that scouting? Has he got people in place again? It's, it's unknown, but that's for the club to come out and say whether or not. And obviously, I believe, kind of that the whole Moneyball kind of situation, like you said, the whole statistic overview of everything. I think for me, I kind of understand that, but ultimately as a supporter, and I know this is quite a naive thing to say, and we're talking about players being a special kind of attributes and fit into this and style of play. I just want to see my team win. And I don't think it's about having a certain way of playing football. It's having a team that is capable of winning games and being competitive despite what services are playing. And yeah, they probably go hand in hand a bit, but I've seen previous examples of of our club at Avenue and other clubs where they've recruited a certain style of football, but it doesn't always suit the opposition. It doesn't always suit the surfaces you play on. It doesn't suit a coach who's United, and I think this is where Avenue are going to have to really be quite clever and tricky with their recruiting, because you're playing on that 3G pitch, like I mentioned earlier, and then going to Rylands on a Tuesday night potentially. They're two completely different kind of games. Do you go with a real possession-based style football? Ironically, Steve, what we were saying the other week about somebody talking about Pep's got a lot to answer for at Bradford Park Avenue. I mean, seriously, you're not going to play Manchester City football, on some of them pitches in NPL. So this is where, for me, we've got to be really clever to get that right personnel in. And I think especially if we are going down that, a bit more of a youth route through the academy, and they have a fantastic season this season, we need to make sure that there's players around them who have been there, done it. They might be coming towards the end of a career, but know exactly what it means to win a game in real tough conditions, rather than potentially having a certain style of football. Who knows? I could be completely wrong, but I'm going back to examples, and I think even recently, like Ross Daly going to Guiseley, I think that was a really clever move. Ross has been there with Avenue before. He goes to Liversidge and then goes to Guiseley. So Ross knows that division. He's 33, 34 now. Is he the the division's best player? Probably not. But he knows what it does. He knows what it means to win a game when the tough gets going. And there's plenty of other examples like that around locally. And I think this is where, again, we've that kind of Moneyball statistical, whatever that looks like, but we need to make sure that Avenue are competing with the likes of Guiseley, even with the likes of Liversidge, and you can even go down to the division below, that we're competing with those teams around them to get the best local talent. Because we know that division, when you go down a division, the quality you're almost attracting is a different kind of quality, but the competition's stronger and talent of pool of players gets bigger, because some people might not want to travel to a Hereford or a Brackley or a Banbury or Peterborough Sports, but are happy to travel as far as potentially Stafford or Workington or whatever. So that talent pool actually gets bigger when you go down that league. And so we've got to kind of have quite a decent coverage over the Yorkshire area to attract the right people. We've been in this division before, 12 years ago, and we were attracting players when John Deason were in charge. Had Alex Davison and Nathan Hottie from over, kind of Ferriby way, who've come over from that direction. Still relatively, not just down the road, but it's within an hour's drive that they're capable of doing it, and we're given the assurances that we're possibly going to play and be part of a team. So we've got to be recruitment is crucial, and I think this is where I'm saying pre-season, especially I think for Avenue and a lot of other clubs, but especially for Avenue, the situation we're in, we got it wrong pre-season, and it's got to be right, because the last thing you can do is to start a season like we did this season, not win 10 games on a bounce, because I think if you do that again, there's going to be a lot more pressure, not only on Bowden and Boschel, but I think even more so on the powers at the top.
Yeah, you can't be relying on me to pick out which fixture is going to get your first win next season, mate.
You haven't got Kurjan Ash to pick out that time now.
Yeah, that's what's missing.
If only they were in the MPL, yeah.
How realistic do you think it will be that they'll get the necessary budget, though, with this talk of sustainability, obviously, in the chairman's statement as well? It just feels like, is it just going to be cut down, and actually you could be at the lower end of the budget in that table? And where do you end up then?
Yeah, it's a possibility, mate. And I think this is where people and supporters almost not necessarily need it's a bit of reassurance, I think, just to say, right, if the budget is cut so much, did Bauer and Boschel leave? And if that is the case, we need to know as soon as possible to prepare for a pre-season without Bauer and Boschel and somebody else in charge, because we know Bauer and Boschel leave. I'll be honest, them 6-7 players that I mentioned earlier will likely go. And with that, you've got a whole rebuilding process, a whole new squad to build with. What money? Like you said, if Brown and Bosch are not going to take that budget, who would take that budget? Yeah. And it's that kind of quality of players coming in. So in terms of realistically what that budget is, it's got to be competitive enough against the teams in and around us that we're able to compete, like I said, locally, but know that we can push towards a playoffs. Whether we're getting the playoffs is a different issue, but have a season where we actually feel like we're being competitive, because I think sometimes this season we felt in certain games that we've been nowhere near being competitive, and I think that's a worry, because as a supporter or a fan, whether you go to games or watching from the outside, you want to feel like you've got a chance to win that game. And I think on some occasions this season, with the squad depth we've got, we just haven't been competitive enough.
No. Flat Cap, thanks for your comment, mate. Has Matt Bauer's time come? They need a fresh outlook. Do you think it's got to that stage yet, Lewis, or like what you've been saying, it just depends?
I can appreciate why people would say that, because like I say, the club's kind of been on a steady decline kind of on the pitch for the past 3-4 years. I'm a Bauer fan, only because I think what he gives the club in terms of the players that he's able to keep and recruit, a decent quality players to potentially be a season to enjoy. But for me, again, looking in the past when Bauer and Boschel left, And like I said earlier, we had quality players that were coming in with, you know, a manager who was relatively untested at that level. You know, we lost the first 2 games 5-0 and we looked completely out of our depth. And Chris will say that because Chris saw that game. And, you know, 5-0 was pretty flattering to us. It could have easily been 8 or 9. Has Bauer's time come? Possibly. I think, again, it's up to him and what that budget and what he can work with. And it also might depend on the players that stay. I think like I said, we're all loyal to himself. So if some of the players are going to get moves elsewhere, do Bauer and Bosch will go, you know what, we can only take it so far. I think for me, the question is, if Bauer and Bosch do go, who do you get in? And I think that's the big, you know, that is almost the $1 million question. And are they prepared to work with what we've got at the moment? Are they able to recruit the players that they want in? Are they up to the NPL standard? I don't know. The grass might be greener. We don't know, but it's a risk at the moment if we keep on hanging on, not knowing that decision. We're under contract, so at the moment they're staying. There's no doubt about that. It's up to them whether they want to stay. I think depending on the assurances get from the powers. And I'll be honest with you, I think there's probably a few more of us that probably we're happy to see Brown and Bosch stay, but I think there is a growing number of people that might, to that point earlier, might think it might be need for a fresh outlook. But like I said, we don't know what it is because we've seen it before, and you know, history can repeat itself. It might not. So it's one of those where we just don't know. But like I said, look, the contract
because they only signed that. Was it a 3-year extension at the start of last season? There's technically 2 years left on that contract. And yeah, it's one of those, if they're not, you know, if Bosch and Bowser decide, you know what, this is the time to walk away, you kind of, like, if it's going to happen, it needs to be sooner rather than later from the club's perspective. Time. What you don't want is to kind of, you know, be negotiating over budgets for the next 3-4 weeks and then think, you know what, this isn't going to work, and then can it?
I think this is where it's pretty unique in a situation with a team who's been relegated. I'm not saying it's rare because it does happen, but
in most cases, though, the management would change, wouldn't it, at the end of that season?
And I think this is my point where I think they have got the support from the top. I don't think that's in any doubt at all. Word from Martin, you know, and I think, you know, Gareth repeated it as well in the past. Now, there's not an issue with the support that they're getting from the top in terms of they think they have the right people to take it on. I think it's more down to them two, whether they feel they're able to work with the resources they're going to be given to do well enough in that Northern Premier League. Because let's be honest, do they need that extra pressure, that kind of extra element of stress to think, you know, have we got enough here to stay in NPL? I think that's for me, that's the actual question that they're going to be asking themselves, depending on their meetings they're having. If they think they have, I think they'll stay. I actually don't think there's that much ambiguity between it. I think they will stay, if I'm being honest, if they're given the right resources. But I can also appreciate, to that point earlier, Stephen, where I can appreciate why they would go if they didn't think they had the right tools and resources to work with what they've got. You know, they are under contract. So if you, like with anything, if you're under contract, do you walk away? You know, like I said, the powers seem to back them, so that will cost them money to get rid of them potentially. Have we got that money to get rid of them with, you know, a relatively small budget what we've had? Again, it's questions that, you know, again, we probably won't know and don't need to know because that's up to the club to decide. So there's a lot of factors going into it. But for me, as a supporter, and I think a lot of us that do go and watch him and feel that we need to be as strong as we possibly can going into pre-season. I think the last thing that we need to be doing is halfway through pre-season, having trialists upon trialists upon trialists, and not knowing who they are, where they've been, are they going to be staying with us? Some trialists playing 5 or 6 games and then not being kept on because they're not good enough. You know, I think we've got to be hitting pre-season almost midway through and knowing that our team is ready to kick off that season in the NPL. So, yeah, there's stuff to clear up. Don't get me wrong. Do I think they'll be there for day one? Yes. Do I think they'll be there at the end of the season? I'm not too sure, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, what about in terms of the junior teams, the academy? How much is that a source of optimism for the future? And what does that pathway look like? And when do you think it'll start to bear fruit?
I think it already is. I think there seems to be some really good work from Thomas Stravick, who's kind of running the academy, along with the other coaches of likes of Pat Maguire and Blake and Owen, associated with Frickley as well. So the conveyor belt is kind of already ticking over. Like I said earlier, Miles has come in, probably almost forced into the first team because there wasn't many other options with Blythe leaving. So he's come in and done magnificently well. If I'm being honest, he stood out a lot, and I think even to the point where some people are saying we should have given academy players a chance earlier. Personally speaking, I disagree. I think they've done very well, but I think throwing him in during that middle of the season, or even at the beginning when we were not winning in 10 games, is an environment you probably don't want to throw in. And after watching them, I'll be honest, I don't think they were ready to take that step up. You only know roughly when they get thrown at the deep end towards the end of the season. They did well. Zach Kersley as well. Zach being in there. George Eze has come in, done decent. So they've all had first team appearances. The majority of the County Cup game that we play against Brighouse, pretty much everyone apart from Eddie Church and Harrison were in the academy. So they've tasted first team football, be it in the County Cup competition. And they've done extremely well this season in terms of the different groups. So Group 1, unfortunately, they needed to beat Halifax to stand a chance of winning the title. They lost yesterday 1-0, but they finished. I think they've got one game left against Charlie, but a matter of a couple of points behind Wrexham. So Group 1 have done amazing. That's been unheard of in terms of having an academy that's doing really well at that level. Group 2, I think, have amassed more points than they ever before, and same with Group 3 have done well. So they've just got to do what they're doing, I think, at the moment and keep producing it. And I know that Tom's a level-headed person. They don't like to get ahead of themselves. They know it's part of that pathway, like you said, to get to the first team and seeing that that kind of end product to do well. Miles is, he's close. He's, like I said, he's in that first team, but the big test comes next season because ultimately Miles, at the moment, you'd probably put as one of your first starting names on that team sheet. It's can he be consistent enough in the MPL because he hasn't probably had that tricky period in the first team where the experienced players have got through him. And that's where I'm saying that they need that experience around him to help him out. So yeah, it's doing well. But there's a long way to go. And we, when you look down the road at Guiseley and the likes of Halifax, etc., who've had, successful academies for quite a number of years now, those are the kind of models you're kind of looking towards and basing yourself on and, almost replicating it. But it's encouraging that that's in the background because without that, you are almost, your hands forced into just buying players and blowing your budgets and doing this and the other. Luckily, you've got that local talent to call upon. And you never know with likes of Miles and Zach have been predominantly in the first team in the past, month or two. People might come and join us and look towards that academy and that system and that setup to actually, it's a good way to get into the football system, so to speak, and work your way up.
Bit of a tricky one, but considering relegation, but who's been your player of the season for Avenue, would you say?
I think there's I say standouts in a relegation season. I think probably Will Longbottom for me has been outstanding. And I think it was absolutely crucial that we signed into a contract because, again, if he is to leave, somebody's going to have to come and pay him. I think Will stood out not only because of his quality, but his versatility. He's out to left wing back, he's out on the left wing. I think for some of his best performances have been in centre midfield and midway through the season when we started to win games. I mean, in the last, like I say, when Blythe left, he was the man up front and arguably led the line. If I'm being honest, probably better than any striker we've had this season. So I think for Will, that was probably a really good end to the season for him. If we keep him doing it, let's be honest, we do need a goal scorer, we need a striker, but somebody like Will to play off him. He knows that position now and he can do it. And the thing is with Will that he's athletic, he's fit enough, but he's also got a little bit of quality about him. He's a left footer, which is quite rare sometimes. So he's got a little bit of, technical ability to add to that. Would I want him to go as my striker into next season? No, because I don't think he's a number 9. But as a creative like number 10 playing in around him, I think it'd be perfect. So for me, Will, it wouldn't surprise me if a couple of people were looking at him. I think there'll be him that'll be looked at. I think George will probably be looked at who's under contract and Lucas Dunstan. I think for me, them three are capable of staying in this league. And also, for me, one of the shout-outs is Luke Haven, who's been colossal at the back, playing nearly every minute, if not every minute, here and there, coming off maybe 2-3 minutes to go. But for what he's done, playing in quite a reshuffled back four at times with loans coming in, people being injured, suspended, Mitch Lundy's regular partner being out, Mark Ross having to come in 2 or 3 games, and, from back and beyond. Lucas stood up and, I think he's led the team, not just on the field, but I've seen it off the field where he's, to that point I made a few weeks ago, he was organising taxis to get to the game at Telford. He's that kind of person who will lead from the front. So yeah, there's a couple of standouts. There's a couple of players who, I'll be on it. Well, I'd say probably a couple. There's a few more than that who've not reached potential, who should have done a lot better with the quality they've got. And I think that's part of the reason why we've got relegated. And I think depending on the budget and the squad that we've got, it wouldn't surprise me if a few of them didn't come back. And I think that the tricky thing is going into next season. I don't think you're going into next season with that squad again, because it's got that feel of a bit of a relegation mentality. You've got to freshen it up a little bit to get rid of that, DNA supposedly in yourself. And I think, unfortunately, I don't think some of them lived up to some of the potential that they've got. But you never know, they might stay and have an absolute wow of a season next season. But yeah, stand out for me is Longbottom for sure.
Yeah, you feel like it's got to be a good start, hasn't it, next season? Otherwise, it could really go downhill fast, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. And you look at teams, we've done it the wrong way, where we've had a rubbish start, we've done okay in the middle, and we had pretty much of apart from them 6 weeks, quite a rubbish end to the season that got in that position after January. For me, like I said many weeks ago, our biggest thing is that we didn't sign a player or two when we were doing well in November, December. That's when we should have really helped out Bauer and Boschel.
Yeah.
We got Jordan Preston in, who was brilliant but got injured, and he probably would have in fact helped to stay up, but didn't. But we just didn't have that strength in depth. So yeah, you're right. We need to start better next season. I'd rather start better, have a bit of a rubbish middle, and finish a season strong and see where that gets us. We need to kind of flip it next season. But you're right, Steve. I think if we have a poor start to the season, I think it could quite easily get toxic, to be honest.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, let's hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah. What a lovely 37 minutes that was. Oh, yeah.
All the relegation talk this year, isn't it, man? As a Leeds fan, wow, I'm feeling that.
I mean, to be fair, look, how many times have we said this season at West Yorkshire sides? And obviously, it's Liverpool, of course, went down. Avenue went down. Farsley stayed up by the skin of the teeth in the end. City have got the playoffs to defend with. Huddersfield, depending on how that game's going,
yeah.
All right, staying up. And then Leeds, well, they might stay up with Big Sam, so you never know.
I think Steve's talking enough about Leeds to see where that's going to go.
I did put a poll out. Just I'd be interested to see what you two think as well about these old school managers we've got in our team's cross region. So we've got Allardyce at Leeds, got Warnock at Huddersfield, and Hughes at Bradford City. If you had to pick one of those, who would you be going for yourselves?
That's tough. I've always loved Sam Allardyce and Neil Warnock, to be honest. I've always loved the pair of them. I've never been overly enamored with Mark Hughes. I appreciate he's doing a decent job, to be fair. But for some reason, there's always been something about Warnock. And I feel like they're far more of, they're just characters, you know what I mean? Like they're more personality with Mark Hughes. I think Mark Hughes can be a bit drab and dour, to be honest. Whereas I think Sam Allardyce and Neil Warnock are obviously always good for a laugh. And, put it this way, I imagine that they'd be great with like anecdotes and tales of their kind of, their entire careers. I don't get the same that going to see Mark Hughes telling anecdotes would be anywhere near as entertaining.
Well, we don't want Bauer gone, Lewis, but Bradford Park Avenue, the flash, the cash, Allardyce, Hughes or Warnock, who are you going for?
For me, there's only one candidate, and I think it's Neil Warnock. And I know Steve will be bouncing up and down at that, but I generally think Neil Warnock, for me, and this is quite a statement, I think he's been one of the best English managers over the past 20 years. I think he's been outstanding. Let's be honest, with some of the teams that he's managed and what he's done to not only keep teams in the Premier League when he was in the Premier League, but to also get promoted, and what he was doing, I think was exceptional. But he just seems to come in.
When he were at Leeds.
Yeah, well, but it just seems to come in and do the job that you want as a supporter. He gets people on your side, but not only that, he's been so successful. And for me, I think there's just a number one for me would be Warnock, and he doesn't show any signs of giving up either, does he? And I think, I mean, this is just you just look at Huddersfield, don't we? And obviously, I know that listen to Steven and watch it, but what he's done at Huddersfield is exceptional. Exceptional. Yeah. You know, what he did at Cardiff was exceptional. You could go on and you can list the clubs, but for me, what I like about Warnock, that it again mentioned earlier, he doesn't fit to a playing style. He plays to win, and you know what you're going to get from his teams, and they will give everything. And almost where, you know, if you're a player, you want to play for him because he will have you back. You know that you step out of line, you're gone, pretty much. Yeah. But you know that, you know, whether it's with referees' decisions or this, that, and the other, he takes that pressure away from as a player. And I think that's where he's been. I think psychologically, he's one of the cleverest managers I've seen English-wise in terms of English national manager. You know, he's kind of almost adapted some of the international managers that we've seen, and he's kind of adapted to that way of managing as well and coaching. So, yeah, I mean, Warnock for me, he's been one of the best in it. You know, I think Huddersfield, having that connection, being honest, I think we're probably fortunate to have that connection because I think without Warnock,
they'd have been down.
They'd have been down. And that shows how well he is as a manager, even despite his age and potentially not staying at the end of the season. I mean, what would you do if you're Huddersfield and you stay up? I mean, you'd do everything to keep him, wouldn't you? You'd do absolutely anything to keep him.
I mean, we've asked Steve Downs numerous times over the course of the season, haven't we, Steve? Like, you know, if he
downplays it, doesn't he?
Surely you're going to try and get him to stay. And Steve Downs is convinced that, you know, after Monday's game against Reading, that'll be it. He'll kind of walk away.
Well, he says he only what is it? He only works March, April, and May or something. Or February. You know, he only works those months of the year, and that's it. You know, he did win the poll, by the way. He did win. He got 66% of the votes.
So Warnock works 4 months, and Allardyce will work 4 games. So
have you seen the amount of money it's rumoured as well?
He's £3 million allegedly that Allardyce is ever going to make, regardless. But equally, it's one of those as well from Leeds' perspective. If by some miracle Allardyce keeps Leeds up, it's also like the best $3 million Leeds will have spent for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
With their recruitment, definitely. I'm not convinced as I think he might. But I've always liked Allardyce. I always remember as a teenager, like watching his Bolton side play brilliantly, like on Channel 5 in the Europa League, UEFA Cup on a Thursday night, for example.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For
classic team,
you know, his style of football and keeping sides up. He took Bolton to bloody Europe, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
And Ivan Campo.
Yeah. Mad.
What are you thinking, Steve? Do you think it's right?
I'm a little bit worried because he didn't do very well at West Brom, and that was a couple of years ago. And I just wonder if it's just a little bit beyond him now. I'm not too sure.
What would you have done though? Which would you have done? Brought Allardyce in or stuck with Gracia?
No, to be fair, it's funny in a way. I think it's given the fan base a little bit of a kind of boost. Everyone's like got a smile on the face because it's like, that's a bit out there, isn't it? Allardyce, you know, we never thought we'd have had Bielsa 14 months ago. And now
I'm just going to say that.
So it's absolutely bonkers, and I mean, it's the roll of the dice, isn't it? And it's just we'll just wait and see. But yeah. There you go. Anyways, enough Leeds. I talk about those more time. So, yeah, Park Avenue. Let's get on to cheerier things.
Oh, let's move on to that.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll see what happens over the course of the summer, Lewis. We'll be catching up with you throughout as well and keep track and see what's going on. And we're also... Yeah, it probably will, won't it? Yeah. And we'll also be having a chat about our other teams on another show as well. Probably get a season ending review in as well. We're probably going to get a few of you on together as well, which should be fun and games. Yeah, a few fireworks in that, no doubt. But Lewis, thank you very much for joining us, mate. I've been Steven Browne alongside Chris Bell. Chris, thanks, mate.
No worries, mate.
And we'll be back again soon.